Hello, hello. I am currently sick, but it is Christmas Day, and I'm home alone and have nobody to talk to. And I'm going kind of crazy because I have worked from home for the last 2 days. Um, Long story short, but Christmas week, half the company's out, New Year's week, half the company's out, and I am covering Christmas. So I had to work from home the last 2 days, and now I'm home by myself. So I really wanted to talk about all the books that I've read thus far this year, given that it's December 25th. And realistically, I probably won't finish any more books before the end of the year, just with travel. I will be reading a lot next week because I have time off, but I don't know if I'm gonna finish anything significant. If so, it may be a reread. So I just wanted to talk to somebody and wanted to talk about all the books that I've read this year. I finished a book this morning, and it was such a great read that I've kind of just been in a bookish mood all day. But resting underneath my elbow is actually this precarious book stack next to me. You could kind of see how far down that goes. And I just wanted to talk through the books that I read this year, what I thought. And then just as a note, this is all the books that I read this year minus 3. And then I also DNF'd 3 books as well at varying stages. So I'll kind of get into that as well. Awesome. So just to get started, I want to share kind of my general stats, and I'll be looking down at my spreadsheet that I use to track everything. Hi, if you haven't seen my channel before, I love spreadsheets. I work in marketing and data analytics, and spreadsheets have been a huge passion of mine for a long time. It's kind of how I fell into this field. So I track a lot of aspects of my life, including makeup and skincare empties in spreadsheets. And just this year, I started tracking my reading log through a spreadsheet. So super excited to share everything. But anyways, all that out of the way. So far in the year of 2024, I read 24 books. So as of this morning, I finished my 24th. What does that look like? Overall, I read about 9,400 pages, nearly 9,500. That's pretty good, I think. Like, okay, 9,500 pages so far this year. Obviously, that's a big chunk. Like, if I had the 3 books that I donated after I read them, just because I had low ratings or they weren't really my style, it probably would have been like up to my head, which is kind of crazy to think. Out of those books, I had 50% as series. So 50% made up either a full series that I read, a continuation, or a new series that I started. And on average, I rated my books about a 4.3. I rated full stars on a scale of 1 to 5, so no half stars allowed. And then 18% of those books were rereads, so either books that I had reread either, earlier in my life for some reason. Maybe I read them the year prior, or possibly I was doing a series and wanted to refresh myself and reread a couple books that way. On average, that shakes out to about 2 per month. I did have higher reading months and lower reading months. For some reason, summer usually is a higher reading month for me, which is weird because you would think winter being inside, but I guess I read a lot more during the summer on vacation and stuff. And yeah, so about 2 books per month. And then, like I said, DNF'd 3 books officially. I didn't really keep track of that until about this month. I was reading a book and basically decided, hey, I'm like struggling to get through this. I have just been reading and listening to the audiobook, and I'll get more into it, but I was basically like, I don't want to finish the year on a bad note, so I DNF'd it and moved on. But I like that I've only DNF'd 3 books because it means that 1, like, I'm choosing good books that I like, and 2, that I'm willing to stick it out even if it's not super interesting to me. So awesome. And then also overall, my best reading month was in January. I read 5 books, and that was all part of one series. So yeah, as my tower kind of topples deviously there, let's just get into it. So unfortunately, the first book that I have is a book that I donated. So first book up, Shady Hollow by Juno Black. I was recommended this book by a Barnes & Noble bookseller who I was saying I wanted something like the Thursday Murder Club, and they said it was like that with animals. So I read it. Overall, I rated that one a 2-star, so kind of off to a not so good start on January 1st. But basically, I rated it so low because I felt like the language and writing level was pretty low for what was advertised as an adult fiction novel. It was an interesting mystery. I don't think that there was a super great conclusion, and I didn't feel like the characters were super memorable. I know that I did like the main character, but overall, I know that it's part of a series, and I didn't have any interest in reading the rest of the series, which usually indicates that it wasn't a great book to me. Contrary to that, let me kind of disassemble this stack here. I was waiting to read The Last Devil to Die by Richard Osman. This is probably one of my favorite series that I've read as an adult now. I'm kind of classifying that as anything like 21 plus. I started reading, I was about to move to Minneapolis, which is where I live now, from Iowa, and picked up the first book, the Thursday Murder Club, in a local bookstore there because I have a gift card, and it really started like just a love of Richard Osman and mystery again for me. And so I was waiting so not patiently for this book to come out. I really wanted to get it on paperback, but I just couldn't wait, and I eventually caved and bought it on hardback. I'm actually loaning the first book of this series out to a coworker right now. She's had it for several months, and I need to get it back, but anyways, I loved this book. Like, I laughed, I cried, it was phenomenal. I think that Osman does a great job of writing engaging mysteries that take time and thought to unravel. And also, because this was the 4th book of the series, I was so emotionally invested in the characters, and each character kept on giving me more. Like, it was never a question of like, oh, that character's arc is done. It was, seriously, this character is going to continue to grow, even though these are all people in retirement homes. These are octogenarians. Absolutely fantastic book and series in general. I would absolutely recommend this to anybody that's interested in murder, especially like it's not a scary murder. Like, there's plenty of murder, there's plenty of dead bodies and guns and everything and drugs, but overall, like, it's mostly about, the connections and the intrigue and the mystery of it all. So definitely recommend there. Then in January, I reread A Court of Thorns and Roses, which of course, TikTok did me in. I read these for the first time in like December of 22, probably, back when I was living in Ames and in Iowa, and these are really the books that I would attribute me falling back into love with reading fantasy after graduating college. I often told myself, like, oh, it's fine, you can't really read for yourself. Like, growing up as a kid, I loved reading, right? That was my go-to. We would go to the library every day, or every week, and we'd walk out with stacks like this, and the librarians would let us, even though there was a limit. They'd let us because they knew that we were legitimately reading them and that we lived far away from town and everything. But I remember like that being a huge part of my childhood, obviously like Harry Potter and things like that. But in college, I didn't have the time to read for myself because I was reading hundreds of pages of college level literature every week. So I kind of took a break from reading for 3 years. And then this was the first series that really brought me back into reading after college. And I kid you not, my partner, if you ask him about this series, he's like, oh, you were an absolute menace during this time period, because I would finish one book and I'd be like, I need to go get the next one. I'd like literally just sit on the couch and read it, and then I'd be like, I need to go get the next one. And he'd be like, how do the books keep on getting bigger? So I reread this at the beginning of the year as a little treat for myself and greatly enjoyed it. I know that Sarah J Maas is kind of controversial in the like book talk world, but I don't know. I don't read too much into the writing. It's just kind of a fun story. I like the characters. I like the magic system. And you know, I'm not really in it for the smut and everything. Like, it's interesting to read. It doesn't have a lot of variation. It's not really like my interest in books. I don't really read fantasy for the smut, but it happened to have it. And I think that it gets more repetitive as the series goes along. So I'm kind of interested to see how she'll continue it in the 6th book. And kind of on my 2025 bucket list is to read her other series to make sure that I'm caught up, because I think that the book 6 is going to have some cross-series action, which smart from a marketing perspective, I suppose. And after I got done reading fantasy, smut, fairy politics, I read Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. Not this particular version. This book has not been opened. I borrowed it from somebody, and I always feel like books that you read on recommendation, or especially when you're reading somebody else's copy, those always hit the hardest, right? Because not only are you reading, one, a great story that somebody loves enough to recommend, but two, you're like kind of reading it through their lens and being like, what did they like about it? I wonder what they thought about this scene. And you basically have like a built-in reading buddy, because they've already read it and you can discuss it with them spoiler free. So I loved Ender's Game. It really kept me engaged, and kind of was like the tip, like the little push that I needed to really like get invested in sci-fi and check out more sci-fi recommendations. Another goal that I have in 2025, as I say, like I've already signed myself up for like 12 books, but just by saying that I want to read Sarah J Maas, her universe. But I bought the the box set of the Ender's Game series, and I would really like to not only reread Ender's Game, but read the whole series, which I think is 5 or 6 books, just because I liked it that much, and I'm interested to see what happens in the other books. I've heard a lot about how it doesn't have the same pacing as the first book, but it kind of goes off on like the politics and things like that. And I liked Ender enough as a character that I was really interested to see where that series went. So another goal for 2025, and I'm really excited to kind of get into that and continue to delve into sci-fi. I believe that was another 5-star for me. By the way, movie is not as good as the book, obviously. I think that they did a great job trying to fit a book like this into a movie, but at the end of the day, they missed so much of the character development. Like, they just focused on the action sequences and the battle, and like mostly just the battle game, right? That was really what they were like interested in portraying, which for sure, like, it looks cool, and I'm glad that they did a good job of portraying that, but they missed all of like the mental and like interpersonal connections, and like, why do we care about these characters? Like, at the end of the movie, I was like, I didn't even really understand which characters in the movie were which characters in the book. So that's just my 2 cents. After Ender's Game, we have a book club at work, and we read The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, which I have to say, kind of a contentious pick in our book club. I rated it at 5. A lot of people did not finish this and did not like it. So The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. As you can see, I annotated my book for book club. I kind of had like different thoughts and feelings. A lot of these are just like, oh, this is interesting. But I thought it was a mystery without like being about a mystery. I really loved learning about like the different cultures in interacting in this town, as well as just learning about the different characters and trying to figure out how they're all entwined, because of course when you have a huge cast of characters, how do they fit together is like the biggest question. I absolutely loved the twist at the ending, and when I finished the book, I distinctly remember I finished it while sitting at my dining room table, and I immediately flipped back to the introduction chapter and reread the first chapter because I felt like they like fit really well together. And I was one of like 2 or 3 people in the book club that made that connection, so I was really excited to see other people hear that. Biggest takeaways, what we discussed in book club was this is a book about people of color written for white people. This is a book written to get awards. This is a book written to introduce white people to the intricacies of different ethnicities and cultures mixing in, 1930s America. Overall, I'm not sure if I would really recommend this to people. If I saw it in a bookstore and I was with somebody, I would be like, yeah, I read this, you should read it. But like normal conversation, I don't think I would think of this book as something to recommend to somebody. And also just because there were a lot of people that could not get into it. I think that the first couple chapters are very challenging, but that the story, you become more okay with the story as you get in, and you kind of realize that like we're not following the same characters the whole time. You kind of divorce yourself from that fact, which is often something that I find when you're reading a book with multiple character point of views. Sometimes it can be difficult to make that first character shift, and I think that this was just a really hard character shift. So next up, I read, I had one reread and one regular read. Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett, followed by The Map of the Other Lands. So I had read this. I also got this at a local bookstore in Ames. Brilliant book written as a diary of a fairy professor. She is a human studying fairies in a world in which fairies are this kind of like researched class of animals and creatures. And so she is going far up north to research something like, it's like a high fae, basically, like special fae, human-like fairies, and there is a like her coworker tags along, basically her friends but not friends, friends by their offices are together, and she's like not an awful person to be around, but an uncomfortable person to be around, and he's like this hugely charismatic professor with lots of awards and citations, and he ends up following her up north. So reread that one, loved it. Then picked up Map of the Other Worlds or Other Lands. This one, obviously, kind of spoilers if you haven't read the first book, but the 2 characters, Emily and then Brambleby, which is the professor who follows her. Emily finds out that Brambleby is actually a fairy, and not only that, he's a fairy prince that has been exiled from his homeland and has been searching for a way back after his evil stepmother took over the throne. So I loved the story in this. I loved how the magic world was being fleshed out, and obviously like they traveled to the other lands. So definitely good like good series. I think that there's gonna be a third one. but probably not for a couple years. So, and also just the books are so pretty. Like, are those not the prettiest books you've ever seen? And then, of course, Barnes & Noble comes out with, like, special editions that have, like, sprayed edges, and then they come out with the soft cover, and it's the deckled edges with, like, mushroom design. They're so pretty. It's the only book that I thought about buying multiple versions of because I loved the design so much. Then we read another book club book, which was actually my suggestion, so I was super happy to share that with people. The Tusks of Extinction by Ray Naylor. I have read Ray Naylor before. I worked at Barnes & Noble briefly when I moved, and was introduced to Ray Naylor through The Mountain Under the Sea. This book, tiny little like 100-page novella, absolutely brilliant. It's about downloading the mind of an elephant conservationist, and they, far in the distant future, they upload it into the mind of a woolly mammoth after the mammoths have been resurrected. But basically, like, I thought that this book was a really good introduction to sci-fi for some of my, like, obviously this was something that I suggested. A lot of my coworkers don't read sci-fi because I feel like it's one of those genres that, like, you really have to, like, fall into. You have to have somebody that you know that reads sci-fi, like a gateway drug kind of thing. But a lot of my coworkers read more like fiction and fantasy, a lot of like fairy fantasy, which nothing knocking it. I read it too. But like, it was really interesting to see people step outside their comfort zone with this, and especially because it was so short, people got through it and they were willing to discuss it even though it was outside their comfort zone. I loved the themes of imperialism and colonialism that were addressed in this book, as well as like the conversations that we had about like the dangers of technology, and like, would you allow your mind to be downloaded and preserved, and just things like that. But I thought it was a really good job also of switching point of views. Ray Naylor did that in his other novel that I've read, and I kind of liked it more in this novel. I think he refined how he did that. So, loved this book. Definitely recommend. Let's see. Next up, we have The Hexologist. And I feel like this was so late in the year. I guess I read that in June. So The Hexologist by Josiah Bancroft. This book had just exquisite vocabulary. Like, I don't usually have to look up words on in a dictionary or on my phone, but with this book, I swear, every couple pages I was looking up a new definition, so I appreciated it for that. This is kind of like a mystery novel about a husband and wife duo who are both wizards or hexologists, and they get wrapped up in uncovering a royal mystery. They're contacted by somebody from the king, and somebody is trying to stop them from uncovering the truth. So, very interesting, a cast of interesting characters. So it's really nice to see a husband and wife who love each other as much as Isolde and Warren. They're just like constantly, like, they have each other's backs. They're a good couple, and I thought that the intimacy in this book was like, it was very much like fades to black, but I thought it like really added to the overall like appeal of the book, like seeing how much like they relied on each other for like to come back from their crazy lives, because they're like getting chased by birds and people chasing them down in abandoned hospitals and things like that. So definitely liked this book. It is part of a series. So I think in the future I would probably be interested if I like saw the series in a bookstore. I don't know that it like is enough in my mind that I would like think to go look for it in 2 to 3 years, which is always kind of like the worst thing about reading the first book in a series, because if it isn't out, then you have to wait forever for it to come out. So next up, a book that I decluttered. It was A Constellation of Roses by Miranda Azbito. This was actually YA fiction, and I did not realize that until I picked it up. It was a book that, which, given the story that I'm gonna say, I should have realized that. It was a book that my brother had bought at a like book sale when we were kids. It sat on the shelf at my childhood home for years, I kid you not. Then we moved, and it got boxed up with all our other books because we didn't get rid of anything when we moved. We just boxed it all. And then it sat in storage for several years. And then we finally got in the position where we were like unpacking boxes in the last like year or two. And I snagged it. I don't know. I was just like grabbing books left and right, like trying to find my old childhood books to put on my shelf. And I snagged it. And then with my brother living here this summer, he was like, oh, what's that book? And I was like, well, it came from you. I haven't read it. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to read it. And like I said, YA fiction, it was kind of like a bad kid, bad situation, you know, mom's using drugs, in and out of foster care, basically is like living on the streets trying to take care of herself, gets shipped off to live with like long lost family that they finally find, and then like of course, you know, the fallout of finally being in a stable environment and having the rest of their world come crashing at their doorstep every couple weeks. There's like young love, there's a magical pie shop. It was kind of interesting because like throughout the book it was like kind of implied that like the pie shop was like a secret skill. Like all the women of this family have like a secret skill. And the main character's secret skill was that they could steal to protect themselves. They were like sleight of hand was their skill. And then one of the characters, like the mom or the aunt or something, sorry, they were like both aunts, but like the mom figure that they move in with, she can make pies that like will just, you know, honesty pie and all these other things. So it's like kind of implied that they're like secret skills, but it's not like outright magic. And then at the end of the book, they kind of break their own rules by like introducing a little bit of magic or like some magical sequences, magical-esque. So I kind of had to ding it points for that, just being inconsistent in how they were portraying. Is it a special skill? Is it like a, she's just really good at making pies, or is it like legitimate magic? It was weird. And overall, I didn't like it enough to keep it, and also it was YA fiction. That didn't come from my own youth, so it's not like it had nostalgia for me. I didn't want to reread it for that, so I donated it to Goodwill, just in case another kid might find it and it might be helpful for them. Then after that, had another book club pick, Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. This book, I'm so sorry to say, I missed book club for. I did not meet the deadline, which was kind of silly because usually we will like move book club a couple times. Like we take about 6 weeks to read a book, which luckily for me, that gives me enough time usually to read one book that's not book club, one book that is book club, and we kind of take our time to pick books, so that gives a little bit of buffer zone. But I remember for this book club, I think only 2 or 3 people actually finished it by the deadline, and then the rest of us were all like, we're almost done, we have like 3 more chapters, and we didn't move it back. So I actually really didn't like that I didn't get to read this with, or like talk about this with people, because I really liked it. It was one of those books where like, so the main premise is a group of people is being held hostage at an apartment showing, and it just wormholes selects a person and like tells their life story, right? So like we learn about how all the people that were randomly at this showing are truly connected, and you know, their quirks and their oddities, and like they're just kind of like, you ever heard the like the phrase nightmare blunt rotation? The people that are stuck in this hostage situation are a nightmare blunt situation for each other. And so they're learning how to cope with being together and being with their captor. So great story. I really want to read other books by this author. I just haven't picked any up yet. So on the to-do list. After Anxious People is my final, I don't have this book, book. It was called Crossed by Emily McIntyre. I did not rate this book very well. I picked it up because I was with my boyfriend at a bookstore, at the local bookstore in Ames, and this is, for context, my boyfriend still lives in Ames. He's moving up here, but it's a long story short, but he's moving up. He still lives in Ames, though. So I was down visiting him, and I picked out one book that I'll talk about here later. I picked out like a huge, thick old fantasy book, like, you know, and then I was like, well, I want to get one more book, and I went to like the TikTok romance table, and I am not a TikTok romance person. I don't know why I did that, but I picked up this book called Cross that was like, it's a dark fantasy. It's like, and I had just like opened it to a random page, and it was like a sex scene, and I was like, crazy, and I like showed it to my boyfriend in the store. He's like, that's crazy, are you gonna get it? I was like, sure. So I got it, and then I ended up reading it. I don't think that romance is really my genre. I will kind of retract that statement with a book that I just finished, but I don't think that I've really ever enjoyed a romance, like a straight romance book that I've read. Straight as in like, it's just of the romance genre, but also straight as in heterosexual. So I think both of those apply there. And I didn't think that the writing was good. I didn't think that the smut was good. I thought that the characters were like poorly developed archetypes, and it came off as like really badly written, like 50 Shades of Grey fanfiction. Yeah, just overall don't recommend, unless that's your thing. Like, if you want that, that's your thing. I also thought that the smut was like really overdone, as in like, it was the same situation every time they hooked up. And personally, if I'm gonna read a book that has smut, I'll talk about that later, but like, if I'm gonna read that book that has smut, I want it to explore different things in each scene, which I don't know if that says anything about myself, but like, I don't want to read the exact same sentences every time the characters are getting it on. Anyways, that's all I have to say about that. Next up, we've got The River Has Teeth by Erica Waters. This was a book club book, and I think that this was teen. This was from Harper Teen, and this is basically like an earth magic monster type book. There's a family that is like magically tied to this land, and then their magic starts faltering, and something happens, and their mom turns into a river monster, and then all of a sudden girls start showing up murdered, and so we follow the daughter of the river monster, mom turned river monster, and a girl who her sister is missing and assumed dead. I thought overall it was an interesting book. I thought the magic system was interesting. It could have used fleshing out more, especially because, spoilers, the girl, Natasha, she learns how to harness the like earth magic that Della is like, the other girl, the like familial magic girl, like, it's like all of a sudden this girl is like picking up like river magic and like becomes so powerful. It's such a like Mary Sue situation where she like just immediately picks it up. The two girls do get together, they fall in love. It's a fade to black moment because it's a teen book. But I did like how this book, like, it almost didn't address it. It like under addressed the relationship. So it was like good like queer representation for younger readers. And I mean, overall, let's see what I gave this book. I gave it a 4 stars. Like, it wasn't bad. It wasn't great. I don't think I'd read anything else for her. But again, I'm not the target audience. So I thought it was good. I did like the ending, I think. And it did have some good action sequences in it. So I think I'll probably end up donating that book just because it's a YA book. Hopefully it can go to somebody who's interested and of that age. Then I loved this book, okay? I picked it up because, like I said, I was inspired to read more sci-fi this year, and also it looks so cool. It's called Rabbits. It's by Terry Miles, and it is about an alternate reality game called Rabbits, in which the players find like errors in reality that comprise the clues to this game. This was like an all-encompassing, I could only think about this. I read it on our family vacation in Wisconsin, and my partner was with us, and he was like, are you gonna breathe? Are you gonna get up to eat? Like, this book is all I wanted to do, right? And then after that, I would like see things, and I'd be like, it's like rabbits. This is like the game, Rabbits. He's like, now I need to read this book. So I would absolutely read this, especially if you're like a pop culture or like gaming person. I think because I'm not super attuned with like 80s, 90s pop culture, I didn't get a lot of the references. Like, I thought it was cool, like all the technology that they were using. Rabbits is really, really good. I think if you're more into like gaming, into like pop culture and movies, I think that you would really, really enjoy this book. There is a second one. I picked it up to look at it, and it does kind of seem like the plot really doesn't evolve in the second book, so I haven't picked it up, and I don't think I will. I kind of like Rabbits just being a standalone. Do you guys ever have books like that where you're like, the rest of the series doesn't exist? Like, I refuse to believe that it exists. For me, a book series like that is House of Night that I read when I was like younger. It's like a freaking long series. Like, it's multiple books, like over 10 books, I think, and it just keeps on like going and going and going, and eventually I got to the point where like one of my favorite characters died, and I was like, you know what, actually that didn't happen, and I just didn't finish the book, and I pretended like the rest of the series didn't exist. So like my friend who like also liked the books and like, got me onto them, she was like, how did you like the rest of the series? I was like, what rest of it? Like, I didn't read it. Anyways, I lied. There's another book that I don't have physically. It's not because I decluttered it. It's because I loved it so much because it was given to me on loan from my partner. It was Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Another sci-fi book. Absolutely freaking loved it. Another like one of those moments where you're like reading it through the lens of somebody else. But in this particular example, my partner actually annotated the book, so I got to kind of like interact with him while I was reading it. I loved that, and I also really liked Andy Weir's writing. I thought it had it was obviously an easy read, but I thought it had a little bit more of like a hard sci-fi element to it, where like he's really getting to the science of it all, rather than just soft sci-fi that I've really been reading. So I don't know, I really liked it. I do want to read more Andy Weir, that's for sure. Then I read Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie. Just a heads up, I hate movie covers. Fuck movie covers. This was a Hercule Poirot novel, and it was for book club. Really not a lot to say. I used to read a lot of Agatha Christie when I was younger, which honestly, like, I think it is a pretty good series for, like, a younger kid. Honestly, like, it was a good read. It was a short read. I thought the mystery was good. I didn't see the end coming. I rarely do. And it was a fun, like, book club meeting. The only thing that I will say is there's a lot of characters. There's, like, a lot of characters, to the point that we were, like, looking up graphics of, like, all the characters and how they're related to each other. So, I mean, I'll probably end up keeping this, but, like, I probably won't reread it. So, it'll probably disappear eventually. Next up, The City of Brass. Oh my gosh. So, this was the big book that I got when I was in Ames. Isn't it so pretty? It is a thick one. It clocking in at about 526 pages, excluding the glossary. So all of that is the book. This was fantastic. This was a like Middle Eastern set fantasy novel about a girl named Nari, who is a thief in Cairo. And this is in a universe where like the Dinjin are real creatures, very real and very revered. And she meets a Dinjin called Dara. Sorry, I'm kind of reading off the back because the names are hard for me. And they go to a place called Daevabad. Basically, it's like a huge travel book. There's a lot of politics. They meet the royal family. There's a lot of fighting. There's a lot of, like, why are things the way they are? You know, like, outsider questioning the culture and things like that. I thought that the author did a great job of, like, fleshing out the culture of the different groups of Dinjin and Deva. As well as, like, it was a setting that I was unfamiliar with. So at some points, like, I didn't understand, like, whether that was, like, a Middle Eastern thing or if it was, like, a book fantasy thing. So that was kind of interesting, too. Like, it was a whole new world to me. And then also there was, like, a point where they described one of the rooms as pockmarked. And I was like, that means that chicken pox and, like, the pox and the plague is canon in this universe. So I believe that this is part of a 3-book series, so I do want to read the rest of the books. I rated that one high too. Next up, Jitterbug Perfume by Tom Robbins. This would probably be in my top 5s for this year. I know that I've read a lot of really good books, but this was, like, so freaking good. I could not stop talking about this book, and I didn't want to stop reading this book. It was very, very dense, though. I have to say, like, the writing is so good. The font is tiny, and there's a lot of it. And also, like, the writing is intense. It's dense. It makes you think. It goes through time and space and spirituality. As well as following multiple character groups, and it's all centered around a bottle of perfume and immortality. So I would definitely recommend Tom Robbins. I went and picked up another one of his books kind of at random. I just went to a Barnes & Noble, and whatever book they had, I got. And so I'm really excited to read more of him in 2025. Definitely recommend. Second to last, I read Unnatural Magic by C.M. Wagner. This book, I think I gave 4 stars. Yep, gave 4 stars. This is, like, pure fantasy. It's in a world where magic is defined as more of a mathematical equation than anything. And so they call all their magic, like, parameters, and it's, like, basically long equations. And then there's also like this troll society that is like has like historical connections to like the way that the human society is like organized, and a lot of time trolls will like be like the heads of household for humans and things like that. There was a lot of politics. I felt like the politics could have been explained a little bit better because I felt like I was tripping over myself a lot. Which, to be fair, like, that's okay. I can trip over myself in a fantasy novel all I want. We also have kind of like an enemies to lovers situation going on, as well as a switching POV. So we go back and forth between multiple different characters. We have Tessera, who's a troll. We have Ona, who is a young wizardress. And then we also have, the name isn't on the back of the book, but there's a soldier who is the enemies to lovers. And there's a mystery, like trolls are showing up like basically drained of all their blood and being murdered with like their hearts cut out and stuff, so kind of scary. Basically, like, my overall reaction to this book was I loved the magic, I loved the politics, I wanted to hear more of that. I didn't so much care about the troll fucking things. And also, I felt like this book could have been a series, right? And then they ended it with, like, Jekren, that's the soldier's name. They ended it basically with, like, spoilers, obviously, but with the main character troll, like, settling down for life and, like, having babies. And I always hate when that happens in a book, like, do we have to? Like, does the main character, whose whole trait is being independent, headstrong, doesn't need no man, is magical and has like all these rites of passage, do they really have to end the book by getting pregnant and like, my life's purpose was to have a baby, after like you just saved like your fucking nation state? That happens. So it really knocked down my enjoyment of the book in like the last 2 chapters. So probably wouldn't check anything else out by this author. And then one final book that just kind of flips everything else that I read this year on its end, Kiss Her Once for Me by Alice Catron. This is a book club book. I did not choose this myself. We wanted, or I should say, the book club wanted a holiday romance story. We tend to go towards like queer fiction. There's like a lot of really vocal queer people at my work. I identify as queer, and so I don't really mind when we get to read queer fiction. I always enjoy it. And this is perfect. I started it earlier this week, and it is set in the days preceding and directly after Christmas. So it was like perfect for me last night reading by myself, and then this morning finishing it on Christmas Day, when like a lot of the events that I was reading about took place on Christmas Day. It was like perfect for me. And also it was just like one of those books where like there's so much delightful miscommunication, and you'll be like kicking your feet, screaming, having to get up and walk around because it's so awkward. And it's very cute. But overall, I thought it was really cute. I thought it was like well written. Actually, the beginning was a little rough. I thought I wasn't gonna like it, but basically I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was a great note to end my year on. So yeah, that was the last thing I read. Like I said, finished that this morning. Overall, I had 3 DNFs this year, like 3 official DNFs. I don't remember the name of it. A friend of mine gifted me a book, which is gonna sound really bad. Gifted me a book on like a queer romance book. Like I said, I don't read a lot of romance. If I do, it's gonna be queer. And basically, like, I was just getting like major like queer trauma vibes from it. Like I could definitely tell that they were like talking around like this main character had obviously been sexually assaulted, which I think is an issue that people should address in novels, but like I don't like to read about it because it brings up like very painful emotions for me. Like I'm a very empathetic person, and so reading about things like that can often like be very detrimental to my mental health. And I couldn't get into it. I felt like it was a lot of like queer stereotypes. Queer stereotypes obviously exist for a reason, but I don't think that books should rely too heavily on them because it just makes it seem like lazy writing, and it's hard to think about the characters as their own beings if you can heavily tell that they're like inspired by queer stereotypes. I feel like that book really relied on it heavily while also like holding a lot of tension that I felt like was all gonna drop with like the book was like giving implications that it was gonna be like a really graphic sexual assault scene, and I didn't want to read that, so I DNF'd it. I got rid of it. I was actively avoiding reading while I was reading that. And then let's see, I also tried to reread Dracula. I got like halfway through, and that book is so damn thick. I just ended up DNFing it to read a book for book club, and I'm pretty sure that's when I missed the deadline for Anxious People. So I will hold that against that book. Maybe in 2025 I'll try to read the second half of it. My last DNF of the year was Lilith. I picked it up because I thought it was gonna be a cool book about a demon, and it turned out to be very, very accurate Bible fan fiction. Not my vibe, right? So I tried a lot of things. I like read a lot of it, and then I was like just slogging through it, and I was like, let me try the audiobook. Like maybe it'll be better if I'm not like trying to sound out all these like biblical ass names and things, like I don't know. And then I did the audiobook. I read it like while I was driving and stuff, and I just couldn't get into it. And at some point I was like, I've had the audiobook on for how many hours and like read that many pages, and I don't even know what's happening anymore. I'm not paying attention to the book when I put it on. And I basically said to myself at the beginning of this week, I was like, I'm not gonna end 2024 on a bad note, so let's pick up a new book. Let's read something that I know I'm gonna enjoy. That was my year in a review. About an hour long. Like I said, read 24 books in 2024. It'd be pretty cool to read 2025, 25 books. But anyways, drop your reading recommendations below. Like I said, this is gonna be a great year for sci-fi for me, for finishing series, and hopefully reading more book club books. So talk to you later. Bye.